Christopher Nolan's second feature film, Memento, follows the twists and turns of a man who has lost the ability to store new memories. In an effort to prevent others from taking advantage of his condition, he has had tattoos inscribed all across his body, which record incidents and observations that he thinks important, including conclusions about who not to trust. In the event, he proves just as likely to manipulate himself as do others, having realized that it's a lot easier to limit your understanding to just a few ideas than to engage with reality's complexity. Better the illusion of control than the sure knowledge that others are willfully taking advantage of us. No one wants to be a tool to be used without due consideration of our feelings and desires. So we keep a close record of the things others say and do which hurt us. At the very least, life should be fair, right? The Apostle Paul's definition of that higher agape love towards which we should all strive starts to sound rather far-fetched when he declares that love is not irritable nor resentful, or as the NIV puts it, that love keeps no record of wrongs. Some of us can embrace with joy the promise that an omnipotent, all-powerful God would choose not to weigh our sins against us in the final balance. But isn't it defying reason to assume that I can willingly forget the injuries done against myself, or that I even should? Don't social ethics and history remind us of the importance of recalling both our individual and collective failings so that we don't repeat them in the future? Am I supposed to wrestle with all my own faults, but forget those of everyone else, particularly when I'm the one bearing the brunt of their impact? Basic psychology tells me that consciously suppressing my recollection of an event can have consequences just as detrimental as unconsciously repressing trauma. If I don't come to terms with the pain of being bullied, cheated on, or sabotaged at work, and try to just distract myself so that I can go on my merry way, I'm potentially giving that particular injury more power to mess me over when inevitably it rears its head later in life. What could the apostle possibly mean when he tells us that love keeps no record of wrongs? I'm Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt with the sixth entry in a series entitled Beyond the Honeymoon, Romance 101. I'm calling today's talk Memory Flexes, So Should Forgiveness. We've already discussed how important memory is when it comes to trying to be patient and kind. Closely tracing the winding path of another's life journey allows us to insert ourselves alongside them in ways more likely to be helpful than harmful. Memory is equally important when it comes to self-knowledge, to trying to figure out what makes us tick so that we can improve. The first step towards the redemption offered by a loving God involves recognizing and confessing the path carved out by our own sin. A confession contingent on being able to remember some of what we've done. When it comes to others' sins, however, Paul seems to suggest that we should hold those faults loosely enough that they fall to the ground, out of sight, out of mind. Is he recommending poor short-term memory? Maybe not. When Simon Peter asks whether we should forgive others who sin against us up to 7 times, Jesus recommends, depending on the translation, either 77 times or 70 times 7. Now, if we were to take either of those numbers as a true limit, we'd be missing the point. Apparently, forgiveness should be inexhaustible, without boundaries. Now, if we want to forgive someone, of course, we need to remember to some degree what they've done against us so that we can release them of whatever guilt they may be carrying. Paul seems to be recommending against, however, keeping a close record of the injuries done against us, a mental balance sheet, which we pull out and reference aloud or quietly every time someone yet again does us wrong. There are many good reasons to take the Apostle Paul's advice about forgiveness and apply it to the lifelong romance. When we endlessly replay in our minds the injuries committed against us by our beloved, matters become increasingly oversimplified. We're the hero, they're the villain. We're much less likely to remember the part that we played in the problem when we're rehearsing their faults. And those details that would complicate our victim mentality, they just fade into the background. Or we're just as likely to embellish our memories by inserting negative details about our partner that weren't there to begin with. This happens because our memories are incredibly malleable. They shift around like marbles in a bowl whenever we retrieve them. Each time we recall a given memory, either to relive it in our imaginations or to narrate it aloud to others, we pull new components into the foreground, push others, no longer useful to us, to the background, and reorder the pieces into a slightly different configuration. Over time, our own recollections can end up virtually unrecognizable when compared with our beloved's version of events. In fact, very little time needs to pass for this to happen because any two people are going to process the same one event differently as it's occurring. We're always going to occupy different positions within a particular space, allowing us to watch events unfold from different angles. We narrow our focus still further by fixating on particular actions, words, images for which we have ready associations and categories. For instance, the guy who is a lover of action films later readily recalls the images, the sounds, and the spectacle of a horrible car wreck that happened right in front of him, while his more empathic beloved who was with him is more likely to recall the human drama playing out among the survivors. The same applies to, say, one of those heated arguments deserving a place in the history books. Perhaps I'm really sensitive to sounds, so during the argument in question, I remember an object dropping, the number of sighs that escaped my beloved, and the beeping kitchen appliance that kept irritatingly interrupting our conversation. My partner is highly attuned to nonverbal communication and remembers my head dropping when she asked questions, my hands clenching when we addressed a difficult issue, and the way my foot swung faster and faster as we retread my errors. All of these things, which might appear inconsequential, shape what we actually hear the other person say and how we store that information. Later, when we recall this argument, which was itself probably triggered by two very different recollections of another event, we have playing out in our imaginations very different narratives about what happened, both containing some truth, but culminating in very different pictures of reality. Who's to say that one recollection is more accurate than the other? Of course, sometimes one individual does have a more accurate recollection of what happened for whatever combination of reasons. But fixating on figuring out who is more right is merely asking for more argument and resentment. When the Apostle Paul declares that the highest love should keep no record of wrongs, that it should not be irritable or resentful, his words actually dovetail with those of Jesus, who calls us to focus on today instead of worrying about tomorrow. Preoccupations with both the past and the future have a way of preventing us from loving others to the best of our ability, of flexing our powers of forgiveness in the here and now.